In this video, I'm going to be giving a ranking of all 9 solo Spider-Man films. Having just seen Spider-Man No Way Home, could there be a more perfect time to do this kind of video? Yeah, I think not. So sit back, relax, and I hope you enjoy my rankings from worst to best. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 from 2014. Oh boy. I'll start with the positives first. I just love watching the relationship between Peter and Gwen here. It's a continuation of the good stuff with their relationship from the previous film. It's just a very sweet, fun relationship to follow. Peter himself was written much better around this time, which helped Garfield be a better Peter Parker. The best thing this movie does definitely though, is that I think this is the best pure version of Spider-Man that we've seen on screen. You know, the personality, the attitude, intellectual stuff like him being resourceful with his web shooters when fighting Electro or saving people, great stuff. And the costume this time around was just excellent. You know, I think it's his best cinematic look so far. And that would be it for the positives. Everything else in this film is kind of a mess. Electro's character arc made no sense, the look was awful, and they gave him godlike powers that he never had in any of the source material. Harry Osborn's storyline was equally as dumb. You know, goblin disease that's just conveniently starting around at this time, that's start driving him to the edge. You know, just bad storytelling, bad story, all of it. Too much time here is spent too much dealing with Peter's parents, and that doesn't have a sort of a good payoff, and I'm just like, not really interested in this kind of stuff. And more time than is necessary is spent trying to set up a Sinister Six film here, instead of making a good film. The film does mostly rebound in the final 30ish minutes, but overall it's quite a mess of a film. No matter how you feel about the film though, no one can deny how powerful Gwen Stacy's death scene was here. You know, it's so intense, so brutal, so sad, so hard to watch in a good way, and the moment of impact when it does happen, oh my god, you know, it still gives me chills every time I watch it. Powerful stuff. I just wish it was in a better movie. Spider-Man 3 from 2007. This film has become quite infamous, legendarily so in that regard for a whole lot of reasons. The biggest change in course here compared to the first 2 films is obviously having 3 villains compared to 1 that Spider-Man 1 and 2 had. You know, audiences were expecting to see a new Goblin and Harry Osborn, Raimi wanted Sandman, Sony wanted Venom. The issue is that none of these villain stories connect with each other in any way, leading to the film, particularly in the middle, being quite a mess. You know, the film just has way too much to juggle, and none of these stories were to receive the attention that they need to be good or even competent. But there's plenty of other issues besides that, plenty of other questionable decisions, like them ruining Peter's origin story by making Sandman the actual killer, Harry's butler not revealing the truth to the very end, the mishandling of Venom. But the worst of the worst here for me was Mary Jane just being the shittiest girlfriend ever with her intentional non-communication with Peter. All of their personal issues, even with the black suit being involved, could have been dealt with if she had just flat out told him she got fired from the show instead of keeping it from him. In the movie's favor though, the action carries over most of the great choreography and intensity seen with the fights in Spider-Man 2, and the film's first 50 minutes or so are pretty solid, with things not going downhill until the symbiote gets involved, though as the years have gone by I admittedly get more of a kick out of edgy Peter Parker and his street dancing. Unfortunately, the film just has too much going against it, especially in comparison to the first 2 films. In all honesty, when it comes to these rankings, it's super close between Spider-Man 3 and The Amazing Spider-Man 2. So close to where I continuously go back and forth. Sometimes I feel Spider-Man 3 is better, other times I feel The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is better, or the least worst, however you want to phrase it. Regardless, they're both definitely the 2 worst Spider-Man movies, by a pretty substantial margin. The Amazing Spider-Man from 2012. This film is viewed uniquely compared to the other films ranked here on this list. Most of the apprehension to this film, especially at the time, comes from the fact that many people felt like the series at the time was being rebooted too soon. Understandably so, as it had barely been 10 years since Raimi's original Spider-Man film, and people still wanted to see a Spider-Man 4. Much of how you feel about this film comes down to how you feel about Garfield's casting. I wasn't crazy about his Peter Parker, admittedly. You know, he doesn't have the typical sort of rootable Peter Parker sort of like personality and whatnot. He's not nerdy, he doesn't have the ideal look. The writing, they made him too much of a hipster. Overall, it wasn't ideal. I do think his Spider-Man was quite good though. He pulls off the lightheartedness much better than the original Raimi Spider-Man. There's a lot more joking around. I thought it was a pretty good Spider-Man. I really did not like the costume though. They tried too hard to make it different and it ended up being quite a mess. Probably the smartest thing that the film does is make Peter's origin story, as well as the villain world around him, make a whole lot more sense. You know, everything being tied back to Oscorp when it comes to sort of his original spider bite, as well as the creation of the lizard. The lizard overall looked okay, although unfortunately they removed key aspects about the character Curt Connors, mainly his family, that make the character more of a sympathetic villain. The best thing the movie did definitely was the relationship between Peter and Gwen. You know, this is in large part thanks to the two having great chemistry, as well as Stone's Gwen Stacy just being excellent. You know, overall their romance, it's so sweet, so natural, so fun to watch, and much better than any of the romance seen in the Raimi films or the MCU films. The movie also thankfully gets better as it goes along. You know, it starts off kind of shaky. Their attempts to sort of recreate sort of stuff from the 2002 films are like, but the more the movie goes on, the more it does sort of its own thing to where it's all like, you know what, on its own merits, it's a solid Spidey film. You know, removed from the comparison to the first film, which is hard to do, overall, it's a pretty solid movie. Sam Raimi's original Spider-Man from 2002. This film feels like the 60s comics come to life. You know, those original Stan Lee and Steve Ditko stories. The film just has sort of this great classic comic book movie kind of vibe going for it, while absolutely nailing the origin story for Spider-Man, with the exception of the organic web shooters obviously. But moments like Peter wall crawling for the first time, or web swinging for the first time while chasing the burglar, are so powerful and showcase the origin story perfectly. Tobey Maguire ends up being just the perfect Peter Parker. He's a solid Spidey too, though there are some aspects where he's not obviously great, like sort of the lightheartedness or joking around, but it kind of is what it is. The second half of the film, focusing on his conflict with the Green Goblin, works well too, but it's not as good as the origin part of the story, and I've never been a fan of that Goblin costume, but the portrayal of the character was very nice here. In the end, the film had all the elements going for it to make it a standout comic book film during what was a very hit or miss time for them during the early 2000s. Spider-Man Far From Home from 2019. Far From Home continued the positive, enjoyable elements established by its predecessor, while also having the uniqueness of being the first Spidey film that doesn't take place in New York. Prior to No Way Home, it was the largest Spidey film in terms of scale, to where Spidey truly is facing an Avengers-level threat by the end of the film. The film also tied a nice bow on Peter and Tony's relationship. What really makes the movie, though, is the excellent adaptation of the character Mysterio. He's a tough villain to pull off and write story-wise, but here they managed to do it brilliantly, to where I think he's the best villain they've done in live action. It was able to help overcome some of the film's shortcomings writing-wise, while its mid- and post-credit scenes are probably the most impactful in any film ever. Spider-Man Homecoming from 2017. Homecoming gave us a quality, youthful, energetic, fresh look at Spider-Man / Peter Parker that took full advantages of the resources the MCU had to offer, while still showcasing what makes Spider-Man special on his own. Many state or feel that this version of Spider-Man is too reliant on the outer MCU, mainly Iron Man, to function, but I understand why Sony was looking to take full advantage of him being in the MCU. Plus, what's the point of having Spidey in the MCU if you're not going to make him really a part of the MCU? But there's plenty of quality filmmaking, story, and humor to make it all worth it. The Vulture is a pretty lame Spider-Man villain in most other media, or pretty much all other media, but here they managed to do some reworking of the character to make him a pretty formidable, entertaining villain on his own, in large part thanks to great work from Michael Keaton. In the end, following his debut in Civil War, this film showcased that Holland's Spidey was here to stay. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse from 2018. This is one of the most stylish, fresh, entertaining movies you'll ever see. There's just no film quite like it, whether you're talking about a superhero film or just a regular film in general. The film has all the need to have elements of great superhero filmmaking. Additionally, there's a killer soundtrack and a great, and I mean great, villain in the Kingpin here. But the multiverse concept is where the filmmakers have a whole lot of fun with the Spidey variants and the freedom to tell a very different kind of Spider-Man story. The total package is one of the best non-Disney animated films ever made. Spider-Man 2 from 2004. This is one of those films that's almost absolutely perfect in its execution of basically everything that it's trying to do. Here it showcased that Peter's life is just a beautiful struggle, when it comes to relationship-wise with MJ and Harry, job-wise, school-wise, you name it, all thanks to his life of responsibility as Spider-Man. This kind of personal struggle and conflict is probably the best I've ever seen done in a comic book film, topping even stuff that we've seen done in the Dark Knight trilogy or Logan. Dr. Octopus here was an excellent villain, highlighted by some amazing scenes such as the hospital scene. And the film's action received a significant upgrade over the solid action showcased in the first film. The fights between Spidey and Knock at the bank/side of the building, and then obviously the train fight, remain among the best comic book movie fights even 17 years after the film. All of this helps the film earn its beautiful ending as Peter and MJ finally come together as he's ready to embrace his life as Spidey. To sum things up, to me, this is still the ultimate Spider-Man film. Well, that is, it was the ultimate Spider-Man film until Spider-Man No Way Home. Wow. Just wow. Don't worry, no deep spoiler talk here, but I'll just say that this movie was an unforgettable movie experience that it's impossible not to get chills from the unbelievable webhead hype you'll get from watching this movie. Even without the whole Spider-Verse gimmick that everyone was hyped for, this movie just had the backbones of being a great movie on its own. This movie really puts MCU Peter Parker through an unbelievable personal struggle, with his identity crisis with it getting revealed by Mysterio, his determination to live a normal life, his determination to fix the issue, and the trickle down of tough decisions that follow. By the end of the film, I was like, holy shit, Peter went through a whole lot in this film. The villain angle of the film has a surprising amount of depth to it that was not conveyed in the trailers. It's very fulfilling and it did all the characters justice. Specifically when it comes to Electro, he was much improved compared to his subpar appearance in Amazing Spider-Man 2, and they actually made him a really cool character. Doc Ock is still great, and Norman Osborn was phenomenal in this movie. I'll just leave it at that. And without giving away the obvious, yes, the reason why most were hyped to go see this movie absolutely delivers in every way it possibly could, leading to an amazing final battle. You can use whatever Spider-Man adjectives to describe this movie: amazing, spectacular, sensational, ultimate, or superior, but I would just say this is the best and now my favorite Spider-Man film. So there you have it with my ranking of all the films in the Spider-Man saga. Doing a marathon of all of these Spider-Man movies, and I even threw in the 2 Venom movies prior to watching No Way Home, definitely heightened the experience of watching No Way Home. But of course, No Way Home was hype enough as it was on its own. So there you have it with this rankings video. If you made it to the end, thank you for watching.